Good evening, everyone. How are y'all doing tonight? Thank you. My name is Brent Reedy. I am the Andrew W. Mellon Director of the Research Libraries here at the New York Public Library. Whether you are in this room or you are watching us out there, thank you so much for being a part of Live from NYPL. Claire Hoffman is here to talk about her incredible new book, Sister, Sinner, The Miraculous Life and Mysterious Disappearance of Aimee Semple McPherson. For those who don't know, and you will learn more very soon, McPherson was an influencer before the idea of influencers existed, before anyone had dreamed of a Paul brother, before Gwyneth Paltrow was selling Goop, before podcasters were influencing the outcome of elections. This was 100 years ago in the 1920s, the 1930s, and she was America's most famous evangelist, a sophisticated marketer who used storytelling and spectacle and the newest technology, radio, to bring her vision of God's message to the masses. Her innovations afforded her undreamed of celebrity, brought Pentecostalism to the mainstream, paved the way for televangelists, and created the mass media world that we, 100 years later, know too well. It is an incredible book. And whether you know Claire's writing from the LA Times, the Rolling Stone, the New Yorker, maybe you devoured her last book, Utopia Park, like I did, you know that you are in for a treat with this one. Some of you I see did the right thing and bought a copy on the way in. It will be available after for purchase too. Claire is also happy to sign copies of the book after the talk, so please stick around for that if you have a copy. Proceeds from purchases go to support the New York Public Library. And of course, I assume all of you have library cards. The book is available to borrow, but given the buzziness of the reviews, I would suggest you place your hold immediately. It's going to be a very popular and in-demand title. Tonight, Claire is in conversation with a dear library friend, acclaimed author, staff writer at The New Yorker, the distinguished dean of the Columbia School of Journalism, Jelani Cobb. His insightful commentary on race, politics, and culture has made him a vital voice in our national discourse. And I am humbled to say that we have the honor of having Jelani as a trustee of the New York Public Library. So how lucky are we to have him on our board? At the end of the talk tonight, Claire is happy to answer some questions. You should have gotten a golf pencil and a little note card on the way in. Please scribble your questions down at any point during the presentation. Towards the end, some of my colleagues will circulate and grab the cards from you and bring them up. If you are watching online, you are not out of luck. Please just put your question in the chat and we will make sure it gets to our moderator as well. Live from New York Public Library is made possible by the continuing generosity of Celeste Bartos, Manaz Ispahani Bartos, and Adam Bartos, and, of course, all of you for being here and supporting us. Thank you for choosing to be with us this evening, and please now join me in welcoming Jelani Cobb and Claire Hoffman.
Good evening. Oh, are we doing the participatory thing, or we just like, good evening? You see, doesn't that feel better? Hi, Claire, how are you?
Hi, Jelani. I'm great. How are you?
Good.
Thanks for doing this.
I mean, we could talk about sports, we could talk about politics. I don't know, what do you want to talk about?
I mean, whatever you want to talk about.
All right, let's do something revolutionary and talk about your book.
Okay.
Shocker, it's plot twist. So just a kind of backstory, we got into a conversation, I guess that was 2.5 years ago, where you were talking, about Aimee Semple McPherson, or as ASM, as you refer to her. And I was fascinated, with this person. I was like, how do I not know the story of this person? And, this incredibly, titanic life that she lived, and then just vanished. And I wonder if you could talk about, your introduction to her and even the kind of landmark, that she left behind and the role that plays in you discovering her story.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is part of the mystery of Amy, is that she disappeared in so many ways. So she disappeared from the beach in 1926, but she's also kind of disappeared from American history. And I had learned about her in divinity school probably almost 20 years ago. And I learned that she was this pioneer of Christian entertainment and had one of the first Christian radio stations and really had pioneered the idea of spectacle and religion, which is something that is very relevant today. And I was surprised. I hadn't heard of her. You think everybody probably knows who Billy Graham is, but Billy Graham went to see Amy preach when he was a kid. So I thought it was odd, but it kind of got filed away. And then when I was working at the Los Angeles Times, I would drive by on my way into downtown Los Angeles. There's this giant, crazy, kind of birthday cake looking building. It's just this huge white domed circle. And I was just curious what it was. And there were often people outside. And so, yeah, it was like another thing that kind of logged in my mind. And yeah, and then I learned about the scandal. I started doing ocean swimming, and somebody said, like, oh, what happened out here? Like, because I was swimming in Venice Beach. And that's when I was like, wait, the person, this kind of swashbuckling pioneer of American religion also had this crazy story happen, and that's sort of what led me in.
Was there like a kind of moment where you're like, okay, I have to pursue this story? Or did it just kind of gradually accrue and then, you were doing it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there were a lot of those moments. There was a biography from 1934 that I started reading, and it had all the kind of rich details of these two trials that she was involved in 1926. And it truly is stranger than fiction. The things that happened that summer in Los Angeles, like, you could not make them up. And I was like, I just love this kind of contrast between this person who is really important in American history and who has been kind of disappeared because of the scandal, and the crazy, frenzied mayhem that she generated that summer,
So I wonder if we could just for the next few minutes kind of walk through biographically, and then we can kind of jump into some of the thematic things that emerge over the course of her life. Now, she has an interesting background. One of the first things that kind of leapt out to me was the fact that she was Canadian. And when we think
like
of
all our important Americans.
like all our important Americans. Well, they'll all be American soon if they have their way.
Is there a difference?
Or by alternate, we will all be Canadians.
Yeah.
Depending. So, but when we think about this, we think of kind of this particularly American brand, of theology and, the kind of public practice of religion. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, and then she has this incredibly complicated and important relationship with her mother, Minnie. And so I wonder if you could give kind of the backdrop, the kind of biographical backdrop for them in Canada, and how she comes to be connected to Pentecostalism.
Yeah, I mean, just to start out, she's sort of generally credited as, building the first megachurch, for starting one of the first Christian radio stations, for kind of creating Christian entertainment as we know it today, incorporating, drama and spectacle and, stagecraft and music and, a lot of modernity into church services, so that was sort of who she could have been remembered as if things had not gone terribly wrong. But to back up, she grew up in rural Canada, near Ontario, and her mother was a member of the Salvation Army, which is kind of important. And so this home was already sort of imbued with this sense of purpose. And, the Salvation Army was only a decade or so old at that point. And so there was this kind of excitement and pageantry that surrounds the Salvation Army. That was a piece of religious life in their home. And, her mother from the beginning had this, her mother had her when she was a teenager, and she felt a little like she had to drop out of all the super fun Salvation Army stuff. And so she really grafted onto her daughter this sense of like, she will fulfill prophecy. Like she is prophetic, and she will change the world. She will spread the gospel. So that had been something kind of said about her. She was an only child, and she, by the time she was in high school, was sort of dramatic, was very into theater, acting, and sort of a leader in school, participating in debates. She was published in the local newspaper for arguing about evolution. So, she had a real sense of herself from the beginning, and I think the Salvation Army and her relationship to it gave her a sense of like the bigness that religion could be, not just quiet kind of, maybe say that her father was a Methodist, like not just quiet Methodist worship.
And she married early.
She did.
And often.
Yes.
No.
Thrice
but
married.
Yeah, right. But can we kind of talk about the stations of those relationships?
Yes. So for her, she converted to Pentecostalism in 1907, which was just a year after the Azusa Street revivals that were happening in Los Angeles, that are kind of considered the origins of Pentecostalism. There was a man named William Seymour who had come from Louisiana to Los Angeles, had been kind of swept up in this, sort of burgeoning idea of these gifts, like prophetic gifts. So, the most important one in Pentecostalism is this idea of speaking in tongues, but it also includes divine healing and, this just very urgent and personal relationship with Jesus. So initially, Amy was, driving through town with her dad in a horse-drawn carriage, and they went past a church, and she kind of wanted to go in and make fun of them, like they were the holy rollers. And so she thought they would go in and she would have a laugh. She was on the way to play practice or something. And she went in, and there was this minister, Robert Semple, who was gorgeous, apparently. And she was struck at once by the sort of truth of the Pentecostal faith, and she fell madly in love with him. And they were married 6 months later. So that's husband number one. You want to do it that way?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that wasn't a long union.
Yeah, he met an untimely end in China where they were working as missionaries, and he died of typhoid, and they had one child who was actually born after he died. And she made her way back to America, and this is all like very early, like 1910. And they're just part of this early movement of evangelicals and Pentecostals who were going to China, to spread the faith. And there was almost like there are these accounts that some people thought they would naturally speak Mandarin. But then
as one does.
Yeah, I mean, it's so effortless. So he dies. She comes back to New York. Her mother kind of scrapes her, picks her up, puts her on her feet, gives her money, takes care of the baby, and she meets husband number two, Harold McPherson, who is, I think, a grocery store clerk from Rhode Island, and kind of a real regular guy.
Can I quote the line?
We talked about this.
I know we talked about this. So one of the things that I like about this book is it is just full of these lovely turns of phrase. But this one, Harold McPherson's Christian faith, like most things about him, was mild and reliable. And I was like, oh my God, if someone described me like that Jelani, he's mild and reliable. I would just die right at that moment.
Yeah, my husband got very kind of defensive of Harold too.
Really?
He was like, we should start a We Are Harold movement for men.
Tell him to send me a shirt. I will wear the We Are
Exactly.
Harold shirt.
I mean, he seems like he was a really kind of regular guy, and he kind of wanted Amy to be a regular woman, and she really it didn't work. And they got married, and she got pregnant and had another kid, and she, literally sort of physically and mentally just fell apart in that marriage. She ended up having a hysterectomy. She had a couple of nervous breakdowns, as she called them. She talks about the sort of demands of housework and wifehood as just, sort of just painful to her soul. And all she wanted to do was go preach the gospel. So ultimately she takes the kids and leaves in the middle of the night and leaves Harold behind. And
Harold feels like there are tire treads on his back.
Yeah.
To quote Jimi Hendrix. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, the sad part is, there's just to say there's so much that happens in her story that I never worry about giving stuff away, because it's not that my book is that crazy, but her story is so crazy. But he ends up they become itinerant preachers, and he's like, I'll be a preacher too. But then everybody just kind of wants to see her, and he hears them talking about him dismissively in the back of the tent revivals and gets sad.
Yeah, one of the things that we should point out here is that you describe very much that he fell madly in love, and there was one person who was madly in love in that relationship.
Yeah, she is a very, her writing is very effusive. She really loves adjectives, and she writes at length. When she writes about falling in love with Robert Semple, it's 15 pages, and there's angels and clouds and sparkles. And Harold, she just says, I told him that the gospel was the most important thing to me, So it doesn't feel like a real love match.
Good old mild and reliable.
Mild and reliable. So to sort of fast forward, she ends up, they leaving him, and her mother comes and kind of again picks up the pieces, helps her, becomes her manager as she's traveling in this kind of shamanic way through the South, right around the World War I. And they live hand to mouth, but the mother really helps her raise money and start to really build a following. She sort of commodifies Amy's practices, and she arrives in Los Angeles in 1918.
So can we talk a little bit about kind of that step and what it meant? First off, these are two women, itinerant preachers or clergy, and say, and it's audacious for a woman, one, to just be traveling across the country without the accompaniment of a man in those years. Also audacious that her mother is acting in this managerial role. These are two women who are clearly talented in very distinct ways.
Very different ways.
Yeah, almost kind of polar opposite kind of ways.
Yeah.
But they're doing this very unconventional thing. How does that come about? Where does that come from? With the two of them in that moment, with very few precedents.
Yeah, I think that what is so cool about their story is you see that these are two women with an incredible sense of ambition and purpose, and their belief really provided this runway. That's sort of how I see it. She's doing a lot of this before women even had the right to vote. Her mother starts buying up real estate. Women often couldn't hold property in many states. So yes, it's incredibly audacious, but they sort of, I feel like they kind of bypass like the earthly realm and are just like, we are chosen, so we can do these things. So they just have this elevated sense of purpose. And, I mean, they were supposedly some of the first women to drive across the country on these new highways by themselves. And, there's these accounts of them crossing rivers, and, they would stop along the way and visit people and sign them up for their magazine. So they really built, as they came west, this national following.
So one of the other kind of interesting themes in this book, is the kind of parallel between who Amy was and what she represented and what Los Angeles was and what it represented, at that time. So they arrive at this moment. Can you tell me a little bit about the context of the city that they have landed in and what it means for them to be there at that moment?
Yeah, I mean, and it just in so many ways is this complete inflection point. You almost imagine like a seed dropping into soil at its like most fertile moment, And so, I mean, in some ways, almost literally, in that Los Angeles, Mulholland had just, opened the aqueduct a few years before she arrived. The Azusa Street revivals had happened in 1906, and there still was like a community of Pentecostals there. They were just building downtown Los Angeles when she bought her plot on Echo Park Lake. And so there's just this incredible sense of possibility. It was a place that was just becoming what it would be in the 1920s, which is, the fastest growing city in the history of the world. It's just this incredible moment of expansion. So people are coming from all over the country and all over the world west on these newly built railroads, these new highways, leaving, in many cases, these kind of rural farm lives with this sense of this kind of glittering, fantastical Western city. And, there's a lot of promises, as there are today, about kind of health and wellness as well. This was a big part of it because all the other East Coast cities were very dirty. So there's this like dream of coming to Los Angeles to breathe. And she just sort of was perfect for all of that. She really, on one hand, offered this kind of glamour and entertainment, but on the other hand, she did a lot of kind of preaching to connect with the folks, right? These, people who were coming who wanted to be middle class and urban but weren't quite yet, and there was a lot of nostalgia for life on the farm and the old time religion. So she would dress up as a milkmaid or a nurse and talk a lot about life on the farm.
There's another lovely line you have in there, which I'm probably going to misquote slightly, but you talk about her arriving in Los Angeles at a time where the city was just discovering fame as its primary product. And there's this great correlation between who she is, a person really seeking to reinvent herself, and a city that's really not invested in your past at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I think is really part of the soul of Los Angeles, which is like another reason that I'm like, I've been, the LA Times wrote this like great review of the book where they said there's two types of Angelenos. There's those who know Aimee Semple McPherson and those who should. And it's really true. Like I not just because I mean, they don't need to read my book, but like I think
they need to read your book.
Well, they can read my book, but I think it's it's like it's like understanding your forefathers or it's just like such an important part of who it is. And she had all these pieces of kind of a new religious movement, this very individualized connection to the Holy Spirit, along with like such a taste for glamour and a real love of technology. Like she really had this incredible sense of always wanting to be using whatever was state of the art to be as close to her audience as possible, like to control the means of production. So even when she was traveling through the South with her mother, she, she, instead of just submitting letters to other magazines, she started her own magazine, which always just mostly had her writing on it, presaging other people with magazines.
Yeah, well, Oprah.
Oprah. But then, and she comes, instead of joining a church or preaching in another church, she builds the biggest church in the world, and then, she preaches a few times on as a guest on radio stations and is like, no, I'm going to put these gigantic towers on either side of her church, where it looks almost like an alien ship. And you could, people could hear her in Oregon and Hawaii. Like she was a big voice in the West.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we're not accustomed now, really. I think culturally, we're not that comfortable with that level of ambition from women. So how was she kind of received, both in the kind of bigger sense, but also in the interpersonal sense, about a woman that really didn't see any boundaries for herself in terms of what she could do or what she could be or how far she could pursue her vision?
Yeah, I mean, that's the dark, complicated part of the story, is that she made some mistakes, and there is some elements of self-sabotage, I would say there. But the backlash against her was already in place before she started making all these mistakes, which I could talk about. Should I talk about that part?
We'll come
okay.
Back. We'll come back, yeah. But I'll just as a foreshadowing, her mother had that great line where she said something to the effect of, she was perfect and flawless in the pulpit, and outside of the pulpit, she was a regular, flawed person like everyone else.
Yes. I always bring up that line. I love that you saw that. She, at the end of her...
I mean, first, that's a hell of a thing for your mother to say about you.
Yeah. Yeah. It was, and the innuendo of it was very intense, right? And that is like the mother-daughter relationship. I mean, her mother really, it's like Kris Jenner, but like times a gazillion, like she really took care of her and helped her and sort of contained all this. I think of them, we talked about them being opposites, Amy was, by all accounts, like a very romantic, somewhat scattered person who didn't actually particularly like being with people one-on-one. She really loved an audience. Like she came alive for an audience. And her mother was an incredible manager, an incredible businesswoman. She maybe carried a gun. She had a real business savvy, in terms of organizing a church. Pretty impressive. And I feel like she contained and managed Amy through a lot of like the heights of her success. And then they became estranged, and that's when she said this thing that felt like it was very loaded to say she was a regular person.
Yeah, I mean, if my mother ever called me regular, I'd just be like, oh my God.
He's perfect on stage and perfect off.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's also interesting to talk a little bit about the nature of the faith, too, because Pentecostalism has this really fascinating history, kind of social history, and certainly a very fascinating racial history. And I wonder if you could touch upon her connection to those two themes and how she navigated, race in her own kind of ministry in her life.
Yeah, it's not surprisingly complicated, but she... her first husband, Robert Semple, converted to Pentecostalism through a white minister in Chicago. And that gentleman had learned from William J. Seymour, who's sort of considered the father of Pentecostalism in Los Angeles in 1906. So very quickly, William Seymour had kind of heard about the philosophy of Pentecostalism, although he hadn't seen anyone actually receive these prophetic gifts, through a minister who was coming out of Oklahoma, which is like another sort of earlier origin moment that's sort of considered in the history. And, you know, I mean, the minister wanted William Seymour to listen to it, but he also made him sit outside because he was African American. So it's like right from the beginning, this kind of like racial tension between these white holiness ministers and William Seymour, who then, you know, held these Azusa Street revivals, which went on for months and were incredibly powerful, but were a lot of white women and African Americans and, you know, rich people, poor people all together having these very intense bodily experiences, and people were not pleased. And so very quickly, Pentecostalism has this schism because William Seymour had, I mean, it's really beautiful to read this like vision of this kind of unified faith that would be multiracial and egalitarian for men and women and classes, and it didn't, you know, there was a real power grab from a group of different white ministers, mostly from the Midwest. So all of which is to say, Amy learned, you know, she's very early connected to that, but I wonder if she even knew who William Seymour is. I mean, there's a little part in the book where there's an account of William Seymour actually coming to see her preach right when she comes to Los Angeles in 1918, so 12 years after the Azusa Street revivals. And there's just been all these schisms in the church during that time, and he is, like, by all accounts, kind of deeply saddened by what happened. And he went to see her preach, and there isn't much of an account of it, and he ended up having a heart attack just like a few months later. But what I imagine, you know, I think about that moment, and I wish that he had written about it, because I think, you know, she came along and sort of offered this very folksy, very white, very female, actually, nostalgic, mainstream version of Pentecostalism that became incredibly popular. I mean, popular in her lifetime, popular through her, and then like in the 1960s and 70s, you know, Pentecostalism is the fastest growing religion in the world. There's 650 million Pentecostals today. There's 8 million members of her church. So, you know, the growth is incredible, and she seemed to kind of like, yeah, gentrify it.
And so, you know, she develops, you know, her ministry at this incredible pace. You talk about Los Angeles, you know, the city itself kind of exploding at this incredible pace. And then there's 1926, which was a very interesting year for her.
It was an interesting year. It's an important year.
Yeah. Can you talk about, you know, she went out for a day at the beach and then everything
Yeah,
went
everything
from there.
changed.
Yeah.
She, you know, at 1926, she was already very famous in Los Angeles. She had the radio station. She was traveling the country. She'd already ministered in places like Australia. So she was a big name. And she was also somebody that people found problematic, first of all, because she was a woman preaching, which was very unusual then. It's very unusual now. And she also was starting to become political, so she wanted them to stop teaching evolution in schools in California. She wanted Bibles in the classroom. She was trying to change the laws in places like Venice Beach, which was like a kind of site of amusement and vice. And so for all of these reasons, she was kind of, you know, she had enemies. And you know, had started to have kind of cracks in her, you know, sort of rocket to success and some mental strain. And she had started going down to the beach to kind of take the afternoons off and work on her sermons. And she went to Venice Beach with her assistant on May 18th, 1926, and she worked on a sermon on the beach that afternoon called Light and Darkness. And at some point, she sent her assistant away to make a phone call, and she went for a swim, which she did. She swam laps in the ocean, which is, like, again, very unusual for a woman at that time, and she disappeared.
Incredible. And, what ensues as a result
Mayhem.
of this disappearance? Right.
Yeah, I mean, people lose their minds. It's over the course of the coming days, people, the tens of thousands of people come down to the beach. It becomes this sort of mass vigil. I think at some point there were 40,000 people down there. They're, dragging the ocean with nets. There's planes. There's a diver who ends up dying looking for her. Another woman who was a follower jumps into the ocean to, like, connect with her and dies. So 2 people die. And the newspapers, this is a big part of the story. The LA press just cannot get enough of this story. Like, they just go wild for it. And they're printing pictures every day of Amy and her children and her mother and, maybe her alleged lover. Yeah.
Now, a woman of God would not have an alleged lover.
Yeah, unfortunately.
It's just not, no. And so she's lost. She's never found again.
No, Jelani.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm saying she's gone out to sea.
She's gone out to sea, yes.
No one has found her.
No one finds her.
So clearly she can't be found.
She can't be found. She's mourned for dead. Her mother throws a memorial service where they raise over $500,000. And shortly after that memorial service, I think
plot twist.
Yeah, plot twist. Like 3 days later, 35 days after she disappeared, she walks in from the desert of Mexico, 600 miles away, and walks into somebody's backyard and asks for a telephone. And she's wearing all white. She's very clean. And she's taken to a hospital where she tells a unbelievable story of being kidnapped by a series of people named Felipe, Steve, and Mexicali Rose.
Sounds like a band.
Yeah. Actually, they call themselves the Avengers in their kidnapping letters.
Wow.
Yes.
It's Captain America in there, too.
Yes.
And this has gigantic consequences
Yeah.
for her. I'm kind of laughing about this, but
Yeah.
this really
It's
does.
bad. Yeah, it's not good.
Right. It's the thing, the undoing.
Yeah, it's why we don't know about her, because right away people are like, why is she, like, wearing a white dress and a corset if she was kidnapped, and why is she so clean, and why didn't she ask for water, and where is the shack with a bathroom that she says she was kept in for 2 weeks? So just a lot of questions right away. Law enforcement does quite a bit of searching, and they can't find anything that connects to it. They find footprints that are actually only like half a mile from where she's from, with tire tracks. And she goes back to Los Angeles, and there is a series of court proceedings. First, there is a grand jury trial to look for the kidnappers. And just to say, like, even when she's still in Arizona, where she ends up after walking in from Mexico, like, the LA Times and the Herald Examiner have, like, a record-setting race to get these pictures, right? It's just this incredible moment, and one, like, runs out of gas, and it's, they're writing about the story. That's, like, how it's, I think the 2 court proceedings are the most expensive proceedings for Los Angeles in its legal history until the Manson murders. But in order to think about, like, how captivated the city of Los Angeles was, I think OJ is, like, a great comp. But she comes back, and they don't find any evidence of the kidnappers, and she kind of can't let it go. She's sort of seems to be like a real bee in her bonnet, of, like, do people believe me? She asks everybody, do you believe me? And she tells the same story over and over, kind of start to finish, but she seems to kind of unravel in some ways. And within a month, there starts to be evidence and witnesses that say that she was in Northern California in Carmel by the Sea with her radio operator and alleged lover. In a love shack, yes.
As one does. Again. And this has legal consequences.
Yes. So I mean, the DA, in doing this book, I sort of, when I first started, I kind of imagined, just because I'm a basic lady, that, she was falsely accused and or that she had been hounded by the prosecutors, like that they had been out to get her. But actually what I saw in my research is that the prosecutor was like, oh my God, like, please make this lady stop talking. I don't want to deal with this. The Olympics are supposed to be coming to Los Angeles. Everyone's trying to make the city look great. They're like, please make her stop talking about being kidnapped. He's like taking on corruption in City Hall. And so you just see him trying to cut all these deals or make it go away or drop like the charges. He disappears for a few days, the DA, to go golfing because he's like, please make it stop.
I've had enough of this.
Yeah. But ultimately, like, it's just too outrageous. And that fall, she is indicted along with her mother, her alleged lover, this radio operator, and this schizophrenic doppelganger that she allegedly hired to impersonate her. Anyway, this is why I say, like, I don't worry about giving anything away because, like, the facts are so crazy. Yeah.
So cliffhanger, before we go through
Yeah.
the kind of, like, conclusion of this trial, I want to go back to about the kind of craft of this. Writing a biography, you develop, an incredibly intimate relationship with your subject, albeit a one-sided relationship. But I want to know what you made of her in all the time that you spent, you worked on this book for 6 years, and all the time you spent reading, correspondence and newspaper accounts and thinking about her, what she must have thought and so on. Kind of, who did she become in your mind? And what, if any, connection did you develop with her?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I was recently on a panel with other biographers, and they all talked about how much of themselves they saw in their subject, and I did not feel that. Like, I'm not that into stages, like a one-on-one conversation.
I was like, did you hear Clarence started a church?
Yeah, exactly. What would be the
so
opposite?
random. I didn't expect that.
What would be the opposite of me? And in some ways, that is sort of how I saw her. Was, I think she wouldn't be somebody that I would want to spend an extended amount of time with, which is a crazy thing to say after spending 6 years on this book. But I think, like, I really admire her, and I feel a lot of empathy for her. Her life is so incredible. The work ethic is astonishing. Her achievements are, the stuff of history. Like, she really mattered, and she really lived life the way that she wanted to live it, at least most of it. And all of that, I think, is so admirable. She's incredibly unencumbered, which is another way in which I feel like she's my opposite. So I kind of feel more like wonder about her. I mean, she really is kind of you said the word Titanic. Like, she is this huge figure. I see also what it cost her. Like, it cost her all her relationships, except for her son. It cost her a personal life. It cost her, I think, in some ways, certainly her happiness and to some degree her sanity, her physical being. Like, you see her take these body blows as the 30s and 40s take place that are just heartbreaking. And, a lot of them are self-inflicted, but you just see that she tried to be so big, and it worked for a little while, and then it's like this shrinking.
Do you think of her as almost a cautionary tale of the
I
era?
do think of her as a cautionary tale. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a cautionary tale for female ambition. I think it's a cautionary tale about fame. I mean, I think she did not understand fame at when she disappeared. You know, she was very famous in 1926, but I don't think she understood her relationship to the public. I think she thought she was in control of it, and she was not. And you know, I mean, there's a point where just as an example, like the owner of the alleged Love Shack, who's the landlord, so many people come to look at the Love Shack, which is just like a nice house in Carmel.
Terrible.
That summer that they pull all the shingles off the roof. You know, it's like this early kind of frenetic fame. And he ends up in a sanitarium, like having a nervous breakdown, you know? So you feel just the cost of people who didn't have a sense of mass. You know, I mean, it's very correlated to the sort of mega church ambitions. Like these people you don't feel like they understood mass, and then mass kind of happened to them in terrible ways. So it's a cautionary tale on sort of fame and audience, and also being a lady.
So I have a habit when reading biographies of starting with the funeral.
Nice. You started at the end.
Yeah. No, because it's also like a really great way of grappling with who that person was and what the ultimate impact of their life was, and then going back to the beginning and kind of seeing those pieces come together.
Has anyone started one that way?
Yes.
Yeah.
A few of them, actually. And Will Haygood's biography of Sammy Davis Jr. Starts with this, also in California, this incredible scene of Sammy Davis Jr. on his deathbed, and all of the kind of accoutrement of his celebrity life, you know, around him. And then kind of goes back to the circumstances of his birth. Yeah.
And I remember you really liked the Michael Jackson article that I did.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
not to point out something you liked that I did, but
Yeah.
I feel like you were that's a lot of funerary
No, I
things.
mean, this is like one of the things, Claire wrote this incredible piece about the kind of last days of Michael Jackson, and was just kind of riveting work. And, as weird and bizarre and all the other things that he'd become by the end of his life, kind of reading your piece, you kind of recognize that, one, he's a mirror of the forces that were around him. Like, he was contorted, but it was also our lens. It was like we were looking at him through a contorted lens of our own making. And then also the kind of human torment that I took from that piece.
But I see all of that almost exactly at the end of her life. Like, I thought
Wow.
about that so much with her.
Wow.
Like
Can
the
can
contortion.
Can you say more, like a little bit, like, so the trial ends, and then there's this kind of narrative of decline.
It's not exactly like a downward, clear downward spiral, because the church grows, and she, there's a point in the 30s where she had, they did some kind of poll, and she had preached to 1 out of 10 Americans. I mean, she was everywhere. I'm from a tiny town in Iowa. She went there, like, she was everywhere. But between that, she was having all these mental breakdowns, is what she called them, and she ends up in a conservatorship. And then, I mean, this is the part that really reminded me of Michael Jackson. She decides to kind of have a comeback in 1944, and she gets rid of her conservator, and she files for a television license, which would have made her, the first televangelist, which you feel like is what she wanted. And she gets, you just feel that energy. Like, I remember that about Michael Jackson, that people described this kind of obsession with the comeback, but like physically being very depleted, and like a lot of social issues. And she had all of that. And so she, and she goes to Oakland for this big kind of comeback tour and a parade, and she's going to preach, the story of her life, and it's gonna be amazing. Like, you feel all that expectation, which, he was training for his tour. He was working out every day. Like, it was a fixation. And you feel that dangerous moment, you know, where they've been so physically and mentally reduced by the public and by or their relationship with the public. You know, I mean, you said a mirror, but I do think it's this parasitic relationship that ends up happening. And it doesn't seem very nice to be famous. And so, you know, I think both of them have, you see that kind of high energy and high vulnerability and a desire to go back in time and have it be the way that it used to when they meet their untimely end.
We have questions.
Great.
You know, very many of them. This is a really interesting one. Do you believe that she was sincere in her faith, or was she motivated by fame?
Sincere. Fully. I do believe that. I also think she was motivated by fame. I think that part of the project of this book is kind of embracing her contradictions and her duality. I think that religious leaders can be sincere in their faith and also really love the limelight. And I think she had both. But I believe very strongly that she was an extremely sincere religious actor.
How is ASM regarded today in the Foursquare Church?
Yeah, I write a little bit about that at the end. My impression just from going to services is that she's recognized as the founder, but she is not talked about that much. They don't, I think she's a tricky lineage to put their arms around. So, you know, I went to a centennial celebration and I expected it to be like a complete sort of Amy Palooza. And it wasn't. It really, like, you know, they mentioned a few things. They talked, you know, she ministered in the South in 1918 to big groups of African Americans, and there was like a lot of pictures of that. You know, they really celebrate her as this boundary breaking person, and they don't talk about the kidnapping. And I've heard that, I mean, this was my experience too. I didn't know if it was because it was me, but they give tours of her. She lived in an apartment connected to the church with her mother, and they give the tours. And when people ask about the kidnapping, they just are like, next question.
Did she and Billy Sunday ever meet and or comment on each other?
I don't know if they met, but there's a quote from Billy Sunday in here. He did not like her. I think he described her as a sexed up something or another. I'm not sure what his words were, but he thought she was using her feminine wiles.
The great line that, you know, as you would suspect, you know, Dorothy Parker.
Yes.
That's such an amazing line. She
Yeah.
referred to Amy Semple McPherson as Our Lady of the Loudspeaker.
Yes. I mean, scathing.
Just-
I mean, Dorothy
there's also
Parker
such
hated
classic-
her.
classic
Yeah.
Dorothy Parker,
yes.
right.
Yeah. But it's
Yeah.
great. It's perfect.
Can you talk about the books you recommended and why you chose them?
Oh, yeah. I guess I'll remember them. I recommended her memoir, which was her first memoir, which really talks about her, you know, how she gets to Los Angeles. And I think it's fantastic. It's thick. If you like adjectives, you will love this book. I recommend Carrie McWilliams' Southern California, An Island on Land, I believe it's called. And it's fantastic. I was just saying to somebody, it's kind of, I would say, you know, you could read that book and Slouching Toward Bethlehem. Like, those are two great books about, that kind of put their arms around ideas about California. I recommend Kenneth Starr's Oh, good. Thank you. God.
Oh, good.
Kevin Starr. I always do that. It's really messed with my head, the 90s. Kevin Starr's Material Dreams, which is part of his incredible series. Oh,
I know,
gone.
can we have this back?
These are really
you.
important books to me. Elmer Gantry, which there's a character in there that's based on Amy, and he was kind of her frenemy. They did a lot of public debates. He was running for governor of California when she was there, and they would have public debates and disagreed very strongly, and he didn't like her much. And then this last one, The Religious History of American Women, is written, it's a collection from Catherine Breckus, who teaches at Harvard Divinity School and writes about women and religion, and it just really is a great place to start to understand women in American religious history, which, you know, often the people that we hear about in the religious history of America are men, but actually in so many ways, women really are the foundation of churches, right? So often they weren't allowed to be in leadership, but the people who filled the pews, the people who had their children, you know, generations come back and belong, like all of that was in the hands of women, along with some standout preachers.
Can you talk about the significance of the phrase "this is that"?
Yes. I know. You could kind of trip out on it a little bit. This is that is what her mother said to her. So her mother, you know, when Amy fell in love with this Pentecostal preacher in 1907, her mother was pissed and was not pleased about it and felt like she was getting involved in some crazy religion. And so Amy said, you know, you need to read the Bible and see that these prophetic gifts, these ideas are in the text. And she says, you know, if you don't find it, then I'll let go of my interest in Pentecostalism. And so her mother stays home all day reading the Bible, and Amy comes home and her mom says, "You're right. This is that." And this is that is this notion of like, these are the days which are prophesied, right? This which was written is, or this that we're living is that which was prophesied.
It's also kind of an incredible galvanizing call, you know, the immediacy of the moment,
Yes.
you know, the need to do something, you know, that addresses the world that, not the world that's coming or the things that will be in the future, but the things that are transpiring at this exact moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a big part of understanding charismatic Christianity is this sense of importance, like of how, yeah, incredibly important these moments are that we're living in. And I think it's a huge part of its appeal.
And so I know we're close on time.
Yeah, I think we are.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So, like, I did want to talk a little bit about the structure of, like, how you did the book, and what your experience was, you know, researching it, the kind of mechanical details. If you could, like, touch on a little bit, then I have one concluding question.
Yeah, I mean, the book took longer than planned. Shocker. And I had sold the book just before the pandemic, so that was challenging in terms of research. But I always had a sense from the beginning that it would have these three parts of, you know, kind of her rise to becoming who she was, and then the scandal. And then kind of, in my mind, I imagined just a few short chapters on the aftermath of that trial. But then in writing it, I ended up really having to wrestle with the last part of her life and the significance of it, because she did have just incredible impact, and she was a huge part of helping Los Angeles during the Great Depression. You know, her outreach was really remarkable, you know, and she was, you know, she would never, you know, stick her head out about it, but she, you know, quietly was, you know, kind of a revolutionary in terms of really doing a lot of outreach to the Hispanic population in Los Angeles and bringing them into her church, and printing materials in Spanish, which was like not a big thing at the time and has become huge. So just like all these ways that she was really important at the end of her life, and at the same time kind of on a cycle of these nervous breakdowns, and she had plastic surgery, and she ends up in all these lawsuits, and she becomes estranged from her family. So that part was sad, and kind of like, really slowed me down a little bit in trying to put my arms around that contradiction. Like I love the contradiction of like, oh, is she a sincere religious actor or, a fraud? I feel like I love that contradiction, but the achievement mixed with the sadness was harder to kind of put together. So yeah, that's how I wrote the book. Does that answer it?
Yeah. We can close on this question. Although she's Canadian born, but this is such a fundamentally American character, like a person that we would associate with kind of lots of ideas that have continued resonance, in this country. I think that readers will take a lot of things away from the experience of engaging with this book. But if you could distill it down to just kind of one fundamental thing that you take from the experience of writing it, what would it be? Or what did you learn on this journey that you think is the most fundamental observation?
Yeah, I mean, I have talked about and thought about this idea of grace from writing the book. I didn't grow up Christian. I grew up in a sort of quasi-Hindu community, or not quasi, but Hindu adjacent. So Christianity wasn't part of my upbringing, and I didn't know so much about it except sort of academically from going to divinity school. But I think a lot about, this incredible ambition that she had and these achievements and what it cost her. And I like to, I sort of wish for her that she had been given grace, there's such a punishing lens on her, and this, a lack of forgiveness for misdeeds, which, partially has to do with her relationship to the truth, but still, it's just, you just see that this incredible person was made small by judgment. And so I think about that idea in terms of people I disagree with or who I think do things that are wrong. I like to think about that notion of grace, because I think you can have really flawed people who achieve great things. Yeah.
So thank you, everyone. Claire Hoffman. The book, of course, is Sister Sinner, The Miraculous, Scandalous Story of Aimee Semple McPherson. And Claire will be signing books immediately following this.
Thank you. Thank you, Jelani.